Refuses to take the actions that are necessary
U.S.
to
President
defend
Donald
the life
Trump
and
threatens to deploy the army to
residents.
crack down on Black Lives Matter
The
protesters.
United States military and quickly solve.
Bolivia's electoral court announces new dates for the country's general election. And Russian authorities declare a local emergency after a massive diesel leak in eastern Siberia. Welcome to Telesur. I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is from the South. U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened to deploy the army to any city in the country. He said this was done to quickly solve the problem of ongoing protests, which are currently held against police brutality and the systematic murder of African Americans.
If a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of their residents, then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them. I am also taking swift and decisive action to protect our great capital, Washington, D.C. What happened in this city last night was a total disgrace. As we speak, I am dispatching thousands and thousands of heavily armed soldiers, military personnel, and law enforcement officers to stop the rioting, looting, vandalism, assaults, and the wanton destruction of property.
George Floyd's brother, Terrence Floyd, has made an emotional visit to the site where his brother was killed in Minneapolis as protests continue across the United States. Upon his visit, Terrence called for calm in the wake of widespread unrest after his sibling's death and urged protesters to do this peacefully. Terrence also advocated for the arrest of the 3 other police officers who were at the scene that night. He shouted, "One down," while the crowd replied, 3 to go.
I understand y'all upset. But like it was already said, I doubt y'all half as upset as I am.
Come on now. Speak.
So if I'm not over here wilding out, if I'm not over here blowing up stuff,
Come on.
if I'm not over here messing up my community, come on.
Mess up yours.
Then what are y'all doing?
Come on now.
What are y'all doing? Y'all doing nothing. Because that's not going to bring my brother back at all.
It's not us.
We're sending a message to people all over this country to stop looting and throw up the peace sign. The power is in the numbers. Come on, brother. Don't stop protesting, but throw up the peace sign. This family has a long road ahead of justice. Come on. But just because we're doing it peacefully, that doesn't mean we don't want all 4 of the officers locked up.
The National Guard have shot and killed another man in Louisville. David Makati was killed in front of his barbecue shop. A large crowd of protesters visited the site where his body was left for several hours. Police officers claim they shot him when they were trying to disperse a large crowd, but witnesses say Makati did nothing wrong. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz has extended the curfew imposed due to ongoing protests for 2 more days.
I signed an executive order in consultation and leadership with the mayors of Minneapolis and St. Paul. We will be extending the curfew for 2 days, but the times will change. It will go from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. I do think it is worth noting that this week there will be, at least as we understand right now, a significant event with the funeral memorial of George Floyd. I believe is scheduled for Thursday. It will be an important event both for the city of Minneapolis, for Minnesota, and for the nation, to watch that process of celebrating a life that was taken in front of us.
Meanwhile, anti-racist protests have taken place around the world in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter demonstrations in the United States. In Sydney, more than 1,000 people marched to the U.S. consulate to demand justice for George Floyd. They also spoke about inequality and high incarceration rates of Aboriginal people and other members of First Nations. People in Kenya also marched against police brutality. Protesters in Nairobi gathered outside the U.S. Embassy, expressing solidarity with thousands of U.S. citizens who have participated in the nationwide demonstrations against police brutality and racism since Floyd's killing. And there were also anti-racism demonstrations in Catalonia. In Barcelona, protesters chanted, "Barcelona is anti-racist," in rejection of the killing of Floyd by white police in Minnesota. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro has said he plans to visit Iran soon to sign cooperation agreements in energy and other sectors, as the last of the 5 Iranian oil tankers carrying fuel and other oil products soon docks in Venezuela.
We will go to the high-level joint commission to sign agreement documents on energy cooperation, on financial cooperation, on military cooperation, on agricultural cooperation, on technological, scientific, health and pharmaceutical cooperation. We are going to sign documents during the visit to Tehran that will take place soon.
Venezuela is beginning a new era in the distribution and sale of gasoline, following months of shortages. Let's have a look.
This was the scene hours before over 1,500 service stations were reactivated across Venezuela to start the sale of gasoline to citizens after several weeks of supply shortage. Be it fuel that has been imported, as was the case with the arrival of the 5 Iranian tankers last week, or that was produced nationally, it traveled for kilometers to these ducts, which end up in various distribution centers. From here, fuel tankers are filled up and sent to service stations.
PDVSA workers have always supported the distribution of our product for the people. We ask people to remain calm because fuel is coming.
Shortage of fuel started due to complications caused by the economic blockade imposed by the US government. Over the past 2 months, only 1/4 of the usual amount of fuel was available. But starting in June, a new distribution model will be implemented.
Well, the price of subsidized gasoline, which is mostly fixed, stands at 5,000 bolivars. A hot dog costs almost 200,000. We were expecting a gradual increase in prices because fuel here used to be given away. Any other oil-producing nation, they sell fuel at market price, but the issue here is who is able to pay those prices.
Starting in June, and for 90 days, these measures will be in place. 100% subsidy of gasoline for public transport and for cargo vehicles, subsidy for cars and motorcycles, and the opening of private service stations where fuel can be sold at market price.
I had hoped they would charge more for gas, because it is often smuggled out of the country to Colombia. If they charged more for it, it would put a dent to trafficking.
Internally, this plan hopes to stabilize the supply of fuel and to defeat fuel trafficking mafias outside of Venezuela. This sends a signal against the blockade.
We will overcome these criminal attacks, these sanctions imposed by imperialist forces against our people and our industries.
Venezuelan authorities express gratitude for the arrival of the Iranian tankers, as the fuel they carried will put an end to shortage and help national production in the midterm.
And President Maduro also slammed the United States over the death of George Floyd.
We will kneel on Venezuela. We will suffocate Venezuela. They want to suffocate us as they suffocate this young African-American George Floyd. They want to suffocate us here in the jugular, with the support of a certain fugitive from justice who is hiding in an embassy.
We're taking a short break now. Don't go away. Welcome back. Let's continue with news. Bolivia's electoral court has announced the country's general elections that were previously postponed due to the pandemic will take place on September 6. The president of Bolivia's Supreme Electoral Tribunal, Salvador Romero, said the new date was agreed by almost all presidential candidates, except the leader of the Santa Cruz Civic Committee, Fernando Camacho. Elections were supposed to take place on May 3rd to replace the current de facto government that came into power after a coup against President Evo Morales last year. Ecuador has started to relax some travel restriction measures on Monday. A number of domestic commercial flights started to operate, and international flights are expected to resume within the week. Back in March, the Ecuadorian government closed down all borders and suspended all flights to combat the spread of COVID-19.
For the first commercial flight, we have fulfilled all the measures that both the airport, the country, and ourselves have proposed. All the passengers have been willing to help us.
We are now past the stage where isolation was obviously necessary, but it was time to activate the country's economy.
Indigenous communities in Ecuador, alongside human rights organizations, presented a lawsuit against the state for the damage to their territories caused by oil pollution. They also say they haven't received any help to fight COVID-19 in their communities.
An oil spill took place on April 7 in the Ecuadorian Amazon. Close to 15,000 oil barrels spilled in the region of San Rafael, between the provinces of Napo and Sucumbíos, due to the rupture of the Trans-Ecuadorian oil pipeline system, the heavy crude oil pipeline, and the Chuchufinde-Quito pipeline. The cause of the spill was an erosion in the banks of the Coca River. During the environmental disaster, the state didn't properly communicate the population the situation regarding the spill, increasing the population's risk.
We couldn't sleep because of the smell of diesel. And in early morning in my canoe, we went to see the oil. And in the morning, the kids went to play and went into the river and got stained. They didn't think the oil could harm them. They played and now they've been affected. They have body pain and now we don't have anyone to help us.
Human rights organizations alongside the affected communities presented a lawsuit for precautionary measures against the state.
Close to 27,000 indigenous people have been left without water. They are not able to fish. Water for them is a crucial and spiritual element, and that is why we decided to present the lawsuit, in order to defend the rights of these people and mainly to call the state's attention, because this erosion is advancing.
The case of Carlos Bay Ima, an elderly Waorani man who died after being sick for 12 days, and is considered to be the first alleged case of death due to COVID-19, shows the difficult situation in these communities. The Waoranis filed a lawsuit against President Lenín Moreno and Vice President Otto Sonnenholzner for the abandonment of these communities during the health crisis.
Some families have recovered with medicinal plants, but others need oxygen in order to breathe. We have demanded that the Ministry of Health come monitor this, but the doctors have said it's not COVID-19, that it's just a cold. Until one day a comrade fainted and they tested her and the result came out positive.
So far, 160 people are confirmed positive with COVID-19, while 5 have died in the Amazonian communities. Nonetheless, their inhabitants assure there could be more, since no new tests have taken place due to the lack of resources.
Panama on Monday lifted a number of social distancing restrictions as the nation hopes to return to normal. The nationwide curfew has also been modified to last from 7 p.m. to 5 a.m., while children will be allowed to be out for 3 hours along with their parents. Among the industries that have restarted their activities are construction, mining, and a number of manufacturing plants. This reopening comes despite the fact that Panama remains the worst-hit Central American nation by COVID-19, with over 13,000 cases and 336 deaths.
We are very happy because the lockdown has been lifted, but we are also worried because there is no vaccine and there is no improvement in the curve, which keeps going up. We Panamanians are keeping the security measures. We are a little afraid, but we're still keeping the measures. Many more people were expected, but everything is in line with the situation that we're going through.
Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador announced the easing of some COVID-19 restrictions. A number of companies ranging from the construction sector to breweries have enlisted to start operating after 2 months of stopping. But Mexico is yet to stop the increase of COVID-19 cases, reporting nearly 100,000 infections and almost 10,000 deaths.
Today we begin production activities related to the automobile industry, mining and the construction industry.
The government of Brazil has decided to reopen shops in the city of Manaus, despite the growing number of COVID-19 cases. The government announced the easing of the lockdown measures in the city, but residents expressed their concern over the situation, as Manaus has been used as a burial place for hundreds of COVID-19 victims.
For us, Americans, it was really a very decisive and important moment. But above this moment, what we really need is the safety of our customers and of all employees. And we are taking all the preventive measures as directed directly from the governor's decree.
Tropical storm Amanda has caused flooding and led to the evacuation of hundreds of people in Guatemala. The National Coordination for Disaster Reduction of Guatemala has reported the total collapse of several buildings and landslides in rural areas, which have blocked access to several regions. Guatemalan authorities have reported that some 200 families were affected by the storm. The National Coordination is monitoring the storm and has warned that there is an 80% chance that it will become even stronger. Women's organizations in Guatemala have lamented the increasing reports of domestic violence amid the lockdown measures due to COVID-19. The groups say women have been placed at greater risk during the global crisis.
Female vendors in this informal market in the municipality of Ixcan Quiche say they are victims of economic violence as authorities have forced them to move their stands as part of COVID-19 prevention measures.
Sales have dropped since we've moved, and we're losing money daily. They threaten us before moving us here, saying they'd arrest us. We can't pay our debts or take care of our children.
These vendors represent Guatemalan women who depend on the daily sale of their products, and they've received no guarantees to aid in their survival.
The president should help us. He offered us $130 but he's been silent since then, and we've run out of money.
Apart from this, experts say physical and psychological abuse has increased across several regions.
Here we have 3 cases of gender-based violence every week, and it's increasing in other regions as well, but most are psychological abuse.
Social leaders say while women continue to withstand this violence, law enforcement has not come to their assistance.
Although some laws were created to protect women, state institutions have not had any training on the implementation of the legislation, nor do they have a roadmap on how to help victims of this violence.
According to social organizations, women have been forced to handle 75% of the workload since the pandemic began.
We have more stories coming up. Stay with us. Thank you for joining us again. The relatives of a Palestinian man with autism who was killed by Israeli police demand justice. Iyad Halak, a 32-year-old Palestinian man, had a mental age of an 8-year-old, according to his family. Every day he would pass Israeli police to reach his special needs school in Jerusalem's Old City. But last week, a police officer allegedly thought he was armed and shot him dead. Thousands gathered for Halak's funeral and raised awareness of another case of police brutality using the social media hashtag Palestinian Lives Matter.
They intended to kill him. It was obvious that they were waiting for this young man. He was walking on the street, and everyone knows that he is not like the others. Anyone passing by could know that he was disabled. 3 soldiers came from this side and 3 others from the other side. He was afraid and he knelt down to hide. His teacher, who lived near to the police station, went out to explain that he is disabled and to show them his identity card.
Over 200 Renault employees in France have gone on strike over the planned closure of a factory in the suburbs of Paris. The Choisy-le-Roi site is the only one out of the company's 14 sites in France that was announced to be closed entirely by 2022, as part of a plan which seeks to cut 4,600 jobs over the next 3 years. According to the workers' union, Tuesday's strike is just the beginning of a massive action by all establishments. The strike comes after Renault announced last week plans to cut jobs, shrink production, and restructure some of its French factories, as the car maker seeks to slash $2.2 billion in costs amid falling demand and the aftermath of the 2018 arrest of Carlos Ghosn. Meanwhile, Renault has committed to keeping all 2,100 employees at its Montbauge site, even after a new project is rolled in down the line in 2023. The decision was announced after Renault met with its trade unions, elected representatives, and French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire.
We'll start holding meetings with Renault next week to continue shaping the future of the factory beyond 2023, to ensure we keep all 2,100 employees that make up the company and its service providers.
We have been reassured. We had hope our jobs would be safeguarded. I think everyone's satisfied. Now we should look to the future, hoping that everything that has been promised falls into place.
Spanish authorities have told people they should not lower their guard. Following news, the country did not record any new COVID-19 deaths in 24 hours, for the first time in 3 months.
The good news today is that we haven't been notified. It could be for a delay. Over the weekend there are some delays in the notifications, and this could change, but today we have not received any notification of visit, with yesterday as date of death, which is a very favorable information.
Nationwide outdoor concerts took place in Lithuania, promoted by the government to commend the effort of citizens at complying with COVID-19 restrictions. The event also marked the end of the quarantine period in the country. Around 400 bands played in cities and towns across the country for crowds of 300 or less to observe social distancing measures. Lithuania reported just 3 new cases of the coronavirus on Monday, bringing the total confirmed cases to over 1,600, including 70 deaths, much lower than in most other EU states. Chinese authorities have found about 300 COVID-19 cases in Wuhan after testing the city's nearly 10 million population. Authorities say 300 positive results were discovered among asymptomatic patients. The city launched the mass testing program 2 weeks ago after new infections emerged for the first time since the city reopened in April, following more than 2 months in lockdown. According to Wuhan Vice Mayor Hu Yabu, it cost the city government around $127 million. Businesses have resumed in the Russian capital Moscow after a 9-week lockdown has been lifted. The Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered restrictions imposed over the pandemic to be eased, and shopping malls were allowed to reopen. Residents were also allowed to exercise outdoors before 9 a.m. However, safety measures, including the wearing of masks and gloves in shops and on public transport, are still in place.
This is the first time in 3 months that I have walked with my friend. They have opened parks, so we can finally breathe fresh air and see our favorite places where we used to walk before. We just walk and enjoy freedom.
Also in Russia, authorities have declared a local emergency after a massive diesel leak in eastern Siberia. Inspectors at the site said at least 20,000 liters of fuel from a reservoir at a thermal power plant accidentally spilled into a river east of Norilsk on Friday. According to local media, the exact reason of the leak is still under investigation, but a statement from Norilsk Nickel Company, which operates the site, says it could have been caused by collapsing permafrost. And with that, we end our news brief, but you can find these and more stories on our website, telesurenglish.net. And be sure to follow us on social media as well. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Until next time.
Follow our program minute by minute